My name is Linda Urquhart. I'll be your host for tonight. Cindy Robichaux will be monitoring the questions. Before we start, we would like to acknowledge that the land on which the County of Essex is located is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, which include the Huron or Wendat or Wyandot bands. As family historians, we have all answered the call to discover those who came before us, to share their names, to tell their stories, to remember them. No matter how difficult the history is, it needs to be shared so we can all learn and do better and be supporters of our local Indigenous communities. Thanks for joining us. Just a reminder that this presentation is being recorded and will be added to the Essex County Branch YouTube channel. Also at this meeting, everyone is muted and your camera is turned off during the presentation. Questions will be answered following the presentation. Just post your questions in the chat box as we go along. The chat box can be found by hovering your mouse at the bottom of your screen. There are many ways you can connect with us. Our webpage gives you access to many of the digitized collections of the Essex County Library, as well as the newly acquired Franco-Ontarian Research Center Library. Email us at either email address. The second address goes directly to the Franco-Ontarian Research Center. We have two locations. The Windsor Public Library Local History Branch houses the Essex County Branch Library. Check their website for their hours of operation. The Prince Road address takes you to the Franco-Ontarian Research Center, which is open every Tuesday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., as well as the same hours on the second Saturday of each month. Join our Facebook group and share or ask questions about your family history research. We've got a lot of very, very smart, intelligent people on that Facebook group. And our YouTube channel has all the past webinars that we were given permission to share with you. The Ontario Genealogical Society is hosting a one-day in-person seminar on Saturday, May the 31st. The theme for the day is your genealogical legacy, plan, prepare, and share. And it is intended to be a day of education where attendees will learn the basics of how they can plan for their genealogy work to be preserved for future generations. No one likes to think about the end coming, but we know we must be prepared for the eventuality that happens to everyone. Learn from experts about how you can think about your own genealogical legacy and what you can do to ensure that it is not lost when we are no longer here to champion it. Here's a list of upcoming webinars. On Thursday, March the 13th at 7 p.m., Ontario Ancestors is presenting the first of 3 webinars in their Research Women series. These webinars are free to OGS members. If you're not a member, they're $10 per webinar or $25 for all 3 webinars in the series. The other webinars follow on March the 20th and the 27th. On Friday, March the 14th at 7 p.m., the Kent branch is presenting The Dresden Cave-In by Eric Philpott. In 1957, tragedy consumed the town of Dresden when a construction project went terribly wrong. Join this webinar to learn about the cave-in, the families whose lives were changed forever, and the efforts being taken to document the event. You can register for that at the Kent branch website. On Tuesday, March 25th at 2 p.m., the Family Tree Maker Group will be meeting. You can register for this on the Essex County Branch website. And on Thursday, April the 3rd at 7 p.m., Ontario Ancestors presents Solving Your Picture Problems. Register at the Ontario Ancestor website, and while you're there, you can check out the events calendar under the Education tab, where you can see what other branch and special interest groups are offering. The next Essex branch webinar will be on Tuesday, April the 8th at 7 p.m. A United Empire Loyalist Cemetery walk last October highlighted the stories of several Loyalist settlers who arrived in Essex County in the 1790s. and whose descendants are buried in a small pioneer cemetery in Kingsville. Heather Crew will expand on these stories and share further background information on 7 local loyalists. Tonight's webinar is a peek into the resources at the Museum Windsor. Heather Colati will explain the Museum Windsor organization as it exists right now, and will discuss what the museum houses in their collection and what resources would be of interest to researchers. Heather is a graduate of St. Francis Xavier University with a BA in History and a graduate of the Museum Studies program at Algonquin College. She has worked at Museum Windsor in the Francois Bobby House since 2000 in the capacity of registrar. I will turn the meeting now over to Heather, so I'll stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours.
Good evening, guys. Just let me pull up my slides here. And yes. All right. So, Museum Windsor is now run by the City of Windsor. We're part of the Cultural Affairs Department under the umbrella of Community Services. And we have 3 locations currently that we are dealing with. The first location, the first location is, of course, the Duff Bobby House. We now lease, or the City of Windsor now leases the ground floor of this building from Ontario Heritage Trust. And many of you may or may not know, it was built in 1797 by Alexander Duff. And in 1805, it was purchased by James Bobby. And so currently, it is undergoing exterior renovations on the roof, the windows, and the siding, as well as some HVAC renovations being redone. We will be offering free tours throughout the year. We have been for the past few years. It has been mandated by City Council that we have 12 open house tours a year. And we do this with the assistance of Les Amis Duff Bobby. And they have some wonderful things coming this year with a grant that they have gotten from the Gordie Howe Bridge people. And so there'll be some great things happening this year there. Keep an eye on our Facebook page for any changes to these tour dates and any updates that we have going. The next location that we have is at the Chimchuck Museum. So we have the ground floor of this building that houses Art Windsor Essex on the 2nd and 3rd floors. It was opened in 2001, and the city purchased it in 2013. Our renovations opened in 2016. So in this structure, we have our permanent exhibits. So we start with prehistory through to modern times, trying to do an overview of the history of Windsor, Essex County. This space also allows us to have temporary exhibits. So for example, right now we have an exhibit that has come to us from the Canadian Museum of History in Ottawa, and it's on hockey. We also have one more week of a photography exhibit that is Nick Brancaccio, who was a Windsor Star photographer. And so in these smaller temporary spaces, we try to tell very specific stories. We have community partners that we welcome in to tell stories. There's also a hallway display that's opening soon about the Armenian community in Windsor. So there's always lots of things happening in here, as well as a children's space and our gift shop. And of course, this is our original location, the Francois Bobby House. Some of you may know it more familiarly with as the Hiram Walker Historical Museum. Also, more recently, Windsor's Community Museum. So 1812, this was built by Francois Bobby. It is a National Historic Site because of the action that occurred on the property in 1812, as well as 1838. It opened as a museum in 1958 under the management of Windsor Public Library. It is owned by Windsor Historic Sites Association. And in 2008, we became directly under the umbrella of the City of Windsor. The base of our collection for all the sites at Museum Windsor really started with the collection of a man called George F. MacDonald. And it's because of him that we sort of have the museum. And he'll come into play later on. So this exhibit space was also redone in 2016. In this building are exhibits pertaining closer to the history of this building. So we have an exhibit focusing on the French in Windsor, Essex. We have an exhibit on 1812 and also one on 1838. And of course, we also talk about the changes the house has gone through and the Bobby family itself. The basement is artifact-based exhibits more than any thematic. Now, it's in this structure that we have not only the largest portion of artifact storage, but it also is the resource area for the locations. So we don't necessarily actively collect, but what we have definitely grows based upon what people bring us. And so we do artifact processing in this location on top of research. Onto our resources that are in this building. We have a fairly large map collection. So approximately 500 maps are in our collection. We have copies of many early maps for Essex County and the Detroit River region. These include French farmstead maps, noting property owners sometimes not. Most of these maps are copies that George MacDonald made himself. The original maps are held in places like the Burton Historical Collection, the National Archives, the Archives of Ontario, and unfortunately, sometimes George MacDonald didn't even note where he found the originals. In some cases, he uses the original map and then adds his own mapping on top of them. So some of them are definitely unique. And so they are a variety of maps, like this one right here is specific to lot 76 of Sandwich, and it is Fort Gowie, how it appeared in 1812. It is based on a map that is in the Library Archives Canada from 1805, but George MacDonald added his own information to it. We also have some of our maps, maybe the majority of them, in the process of being digitized, but not all of them are actively available yet. And in some cases, we photographed them in pieces because they are too large to fit on a flatbed scanner we have, and they're too fragile to go through any blueprint scanner. And so we're in the process of having people stitch them together, and maybe someday we'll have those ones available as well. Here's an example of another map that you'll find in our collection. So it is a copy of the Patrick McNiff map of 1794 of Malden. So you can tell that it's redrawn onto a canvas. I actually didn't make note of where the original is, but you know, this one's in pretty good condition. It's again a George MacDonald drawing of the settlers, loyalist settlers in that area. Another example of maps that we have. So this one noting farm lot owners, the layout of the town of Sandwich from 1800. This is one of probably the more popular maps that we have. because of the farm lot notations. Now, of course, another very popular thing that we have is the fire insurance maps. So for the Walkerville and Windsor ones, we are lucky enough to have the majority of them scanned and available to us online. For example, this one is sort of that overview of Windsor in 1885. Ones that aren't scanned are the ones that are more regional. So the Bell River, the Kingsville, Comber, Leamington, Amherstburg, and Staples. But they are available for people to look at on paper. They're in decent condition. And in some cases, I believe they're the only copies that exist. One of the other things that George MacDonald collected, besides artifacts, was he collected a lot of papers, documents. We're told that he kept them in his basement, and like many basements in Windsor, it of course flooded. We're told that he would take the documents soaking wet out of his basement and he would hang them with clothes pegs onto the line to dry. And then he would put them back together once they were dried by matching the water stains on the documents. So an original order was sort of kept to them, we hope. The originals of most of these documents were put on permanent loan to the Ontario Archives, and they're known as the Hiram Walker Historical Papers there. So they contain a huge variety of things, mainly documents from early residents of the area. So they include, but are not limited to, Bobby family, Bartlett's, Cornwall, Hands, Lambie. There's Masonville, McCormick, Olette and Parent, Jasperson. Of course, the John Prince papers were in here. Droulard, Langlois, a huge variety of early names. So the ones that are on the screen right here, there is the 1788 receipt, Angus McIntosh to John Askin, and of course refers to furs, beavers and such, the pelts and the cost of them, in regards to the Miami Company at Michilimackinac. And then on the other side is a note from Jean-Baptiste Bobby in regards to Major McKee in March 1815, certifying his position in the military, the militia. Now, I would say not all of the documents are, as old as those first two I showed. There is also genealogical notes of those early families that George MacDonald made. So for example, this was a family tree that he did for Gregor McGregor. And although he sources nothing in them, it is still useful information. And I believe some people would consider George MacDonald a source of his own. The other one, as an example, is a 2nd Regiment of Essex Militia, and it's their pay list as it relates to the capture of Detroit, August 1812. So all of these documents have a finding aid here at the museum that people are welcome to come in and take a look at. I would say it's not necessarily itemized by each name mentioned or each thing mentioned. Sometimes you have to take a blind leap that, oh, perhaps this might have something that I'm looking for. But they're always interesting. Another thing that we have here on microfilm is the records of the Western District. So I have noted here a whole bunch of things that we have on that microfilm from the Western District as it relates to Essex County. But of course, Western District was much bigger than Essex County. And there are documents in those microfilm that are in, you know, Moore Township and Rochester and Besanquid and Howard, you know, those other parts of the Western District. So a variety of tax assessments, the collector's rolls, tax collector's rolls, the census records. The census records are not necessarily by name. However, I will say I have not spent a lot of time looking at these ones, but they are there, and you never know what treasures you would find in them. We also have a small collection of original newspapers. Of note, I think of these would be the originals of the Western Herald and the Farmers Magazine, and those date to 1838 to 1842. These ones are incredibly fine in their condition. They're amazing for their age. And these ones have original accounts of the Battle of Windsor and its aftermath. So very interesting. We did have the majority of these scanned by the wonderful people at Leddy Library. And so they have those scans, and maybe one day soon they'll be back onto being available on the internet. But until then, we do have the original still, and people are welcome to come in and look to see which ones we have and see if they contain anything of interest. I think the other thing that people probably aren't aware, we have quite the reference library. It's not a lending library, but people are obviously able to look at it while they're here. We, of course, have the typical local history books, but we also do have books of wider, broader historic topics, such as, 1812. We have copies of the Russell Papers, the Simcoe Papers, of course, the Askin Papers, and other early Ontario documents. And beyond that, we have artifact-related books, such as books about French silversmiths and early woodenware. When we were part of the library, there definitely was books in our catalog that were unique to other places. We often got requests for our books to be lent out on interlibrary loan. Now, I know the majority of directories are now available online, but we do have quite the collection of them. The majority of the years spanning from 1891 to 2001, we have originals of. And should there be issues with any of the ones that have been digitized and put online, or if you just want to see an original directory, those are available here. Most of them are in usable condition. There's very few of them that, we have scanned copies of, or I should say photocopied copies of, for people to use rather than the originals. Now, I think one of our other really amazing collections we have is an ephemera collection. We refer to it as our pamphlet collection. It is such a wide variety of topics. It has church histories. There are university papers, master's and thesis and PhD theses on local history topics. There are things like this dance card and this poster, that really speak to specific times in Windsor's history. There are some newspaper clippings and research notes and the odd family genealogy, not a lot by any means, but some. And I think another thing is any of our past exhibits in the past 25 years, we have made a paper copy of. So if there was an exhibit that mentioned your family or even beyond genealogy that you had been interested in seeing but didn't get a chance to see, it probably will exist in a paper format, and that information would still be there for us to share with you. Other things that you would find in this ephemera collection, we do have some doctor's receipts. This one being, about 1917, I believe. Yes, April 1917. And then on the other side is the Prince Edward Hotel menu from around 1950. So a huge variety of stuff in this collection. Probably another one of our strong areas is our image collection. We are now at over 20,000 images in our collection. And this is in a variety of formats, anywhere from slides, original prints, glass negatives, 35mm negatives, some newspaper clippings, and of course, modern digital. And they cover a huge variety of topics. Of course, most of these being Essex County related, but not always. So I have now a few examples of some interesting images. So, of course, the CPR steamers in the late 1800s. The top picture is Talbot Street in Essex in 1904-ish. They were part of a collection of glass negatives that were found when a house was torn down. This top image I love. It's one of my favorites. Unfortunately, it is an unidentified family. And we assume in Essex because it again was part of the glass negatives that were discovered in a house in Essex. And then, of course, we have the horse-drawn thrashing machine, 1905. The top one is the water pump in Windsor, 1865. The bottom one is the dock at the foot of Crawford Ave, circa 1880. These ones are both Riverside Drive, the one being 1867, this lower one, and the upper one being 1886. What happened there? There we go. Now, we have a lot of pictures of people. Some of them we know, some of them we don't know. The two gentlemen that are in uniform are just known as J.H. Jeanroux and Alex Gow, 1885. And then the top picture, we just have cataloged as the Beneteau family. No date, no first names, nothing beyond the Beneteau family. The lower one is a group from St. John's Church, 1900. Again, we have no names, nothing more specific than they were just from St. John's Church. Looks like a fun picnic, though. And then here are some people we know the names of, but we don't necessarily know a lot about some of them. On the left-hand side is Marie Antoinette Barillier Chen. In the center is Marianne Bobby with Catherine Kilroy and Mary Gall. And then the gentleman, which I wish we knew more about, he's just Mr. Leger. Love his puppy hiding underneath of his feet. Now, those pictures I just showed you are available online at our database, that is www.museumwindsor.ca. This database is a work in progress. We are frequently adding more images to it. It has both our artifacts and our photograph collection. And there is also the sculptures down at the river. It is the hope that more things in our collection will eventually get added to this, such as our ephemera collection, our maps, and possibly more city sites such as Williston. But for the time being, it is the home of our artifact and photograph collection. When you type in that URL, you will come to this page, and it will be have the upper bar that is the typical City of Windsor bar location, but the lower half will be this. And to get to the database, you just have to click on read more. And you should go to this screen. Now, I think for most people, myself included, the preferred place to put in the search engine is this search the collection and press go. There is the advanced search, but the advantage of using the search bar that is in the upper left is that any term you put in there will get searched in all of the different categories. Whereas if you put a search term in subject, it will only search in subject. Whereas I think you have a broader, better chance of finding things if you do the upper left search bar. Another fun way to search on this database is to do the browse by subject. Sometimes it's just a fun thing to see what other possibilities there might be for terms to use. If you're not sure what you're looking for, it's definitely is interesting to see what things you could find. And so if there is a term in this list that is of interest to you, you should be able to just click on the term and it should take you to the resources associated with it. Now, your search results will look something like this. It should be a mix of artifacts, maybe some maps, we're testing those out right now, and images. So our artifacts will all be numbers. Artifacts start with the year and then have numbers that follow it that denote when they came into the collection and how many pieces are in that collection. Our photographs, our images will all have a P to start them. Our maps start with an M. In the future, should our ephemera collection be also part of this database, they will start with the letters PM, which is called pamphlet collection. It has been called that since 1958. So the best way then to move forward with this, to learn more about a particular item after you have your search results come up, is to click on the blue number or the blue identifier for the artifact. And then that will take you to a larger record for that piece. They will all have similar sorts of information, but not necessarily all of the fields will be filled. Should you want to reach out to the people at the museum to learn more about the artifact, because often all of the information will not be in this public viewing of it. This ID number is the thing that we would need in order to find more information. If there is names associated with the item or the image, generally that'll be found in the history. The description is more Should the image not be available for you to see, there is a description there to allow us to find the appropriate thing. You will notice the subject heading is very lacking. This is something, again, that we are adding to constantly to try to beef up the ways that we can find artifacts and images in this collection. This is just an example of what an image record would be like. So again, if it has a date, the date would be there. In some cases, they will have French terms as well as English, as at one point we did try to make it a bilingual database. That was just very time consuming and is a dream that we'd love to get back to. Now, the other thing this database allows you to do is you can register for an account for yourself. This would be the screen that you see when you click on the login or register here. What having an account does is it allows you to save things in certain categories. So for example, I was working on the armories, and so these are 5 pictures that I pulled out about the armories. And it allows you to have, you can see along the right-hand side, a huge number of different lists that you have going at the same time. Now, the other thing that I would suggest if you're interested in learning more about our collection is to follow us on Facebook. Our curator every Monday puts up a different map or a different detail from a map. We have a variety of images and artifacts that we try to post weekly. Also, any of our upcoming events, our speakers, our free days, children's activities, and these will be advertised through Facebook. And we encourage people, if they want to reach out to us after seeing something on Facebook, to do so by email, because we actually get overwhelmed with the interactions on Facebook. And so email is often the easier way to reach out to us. And so our email, our phone number for making an appointment to come in to do research is here. And just as a last thing, I would say that our collection is not necessarily a huge wealth when it comes to vital statistics. But I mean, we do have a lot of those early European settlers. But I would say our strength is maybe adding context into your family stories. What was going on in the community when your relatives were living here? What did the area look like? What hardships were they dealing with? What successes were happening? These are often things that our collection can provide, just to beef up the story of your family. And that is all I have, and I will stop sharing my screen if I can figure out how.
Actually, Heather, do you want to just leave that slide up so people can?
Yeah.
Well, we're taking the questions, and that way
Sure.
they can, jot it down.
Sure.
Okay, great.
There we go.
Yes, I'm absolutely stunned that that you have all those things that you're talking about. I have my own questions, but let's leave it to Cindy to give the questions that have come up on the screen on the chat box.
Sure. So the first one was more of a comment. Back at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about city council and them requiring 12. The comment was, wow, that's amazing that the city is so supportive and encouraging you. And, you also talked about the grant. And so that's amazing that the city of Windsor is looking at history as an important part of the city. So that's great.
Yeah, we are very happy now to have more of a mandate from them to work out of the Duff Bobby House. We have, for probably 20 years prior to this mandate from City Council, worked out of the Interpretation Center. And occasionally we had access to the house, but that they were willing to put the time into leasing the actual ground floor gives us so much more access to the house and therefore more access to the public.
Yeah, that's great. So a question is, you were talking about the finding aid and you know, the catalog that is available online that people could search, you know, a researcher maybe from, you know, Ottawa or something. Are they able to go to the website, kind of do a little bit of a search to see that you actually have material on their ancestor or context on their ancestor? Is that available online before they actually come in for a visit, or maybe would contact you to pull something for them?
Yeah, so unfortunately, our finding aids are not available online at this time. But we are quite happy to take the time to look in a finding aid. If someone sends us an email and says, what do you have on Joe Smith? We can definitely look up to see whether it's worth your while to make an appointment to come in to see anything, or for us to take the time to scan something and send it to you. We are very happy to do that initial research on people's behalf. Or if you have multiple names you're looking for, you're very welcome to make an appointment to come in and look at the finding aid yourself if you're in the area.
Okay, so kind of jumping off that, you're saying doing that research that you're quite capable of doing that. Is there a fee for that?
So we do not charge. We always say for the first 15 minutes. And generally that's enough time for us to know whether there's any material. And, you know, if it's not a bother and we have nothing else that's super pressing, sometimes we'll just get into the research and you never know what we'll find.
Mm-hmm.
But there are, for very in-depth research, we do have additional fees. I think it's at $17 for every 15 minutes now. But we do the first bits for free.
Okay, and is there a fee to enter into any of the museums?
So there is no fee to come into the Francois Bobby House, nor to do research here. It has always been free to the public, and we will continue as long as we're able to. The Duff Bobby House, when we have our free tours there, the open house tours, those are free as well. The Chimchuck Museum, we have the same sort of 12 free days a year in that space. Beyond that, it is now, I think, $5.75 for an adult to get into the Chimchuck Museum. There is also a family fee, I think, of $17, and that includes 6 people. So fairly reasonable.
Absolutely. Okay, that was all the questions that came in so far. So Linda, have at it.
Yeah, okay. I was very interested in that picture, the slide you put on there showing your library.
Yeah,
Is that at the Francois Bobby House?
it is.
And so if we were visiting the Francois Bobby House, do we have access to like browse into that library, or is it
Well, so generally, my staff and I would pull things out for you. Like, people usually come in and say, I am interested in a certain topic, and we pull out whatever we can for them. There are some researchers that are quite frequent visitors here that we have given access to the research library before. But I will say, essentially, the research library is my office, my desk and computer in here. So it's not a public space. But yeah, I definitely will pull books out for people to look at.
And same with all the documents you were talking about, and like the newspapers, you said, can we
Mhm.
actually see the newspapers? It sounded as though
Yeah,
we can actually read them. So
yeah, most
I
certainly.
can't imagine we were touching them, because I would think they would be too fragile.
Well, the amazing thing is those ones from 1838, are in better condition than the ones from the 1920s.
Hmm.
They are a rag-based paper rather than the wood pulp-based paper from the 1920s. And so they don't have the issue of the acid eating them. And so, yeah, definitely the 1930 or the 1838 newspapers are amazing to see. And we have gloves here that we're happy to lend to people so that they can experience that themselves.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I was also wondering about the George MacDonald. I think there's a George MacDonald Fonds at the Windsor Public Library archives.
Yeah.
Is that part of your collection or is that separate?
No, that is separate. I'm trying to remember what exactly they had there. I'm part of my brain thinks that they were more family papers that the
Yeah, I
um
think there was a bunch of families listed under them. Yes,
mhm. Yeah,
yes.
so what we have is above and beyond that and different than um within the Hiram Walker historical papers there are 230 some odd different fonts that are identified. One of those being George MacDonald's papers. And as I said, he has a lot of genealogical stuff in there. Um, a lot of the other information is just random, receipts and notes and from a huge variety of families. And most of them, those early European settlers, the 1800s, seem to be where George MacDonald uh, did most of his collecting.
So would that be the same like with the Hiram Walker historical papers? Like we can actually see those fonts or those papers?
Yes. So we have the finding aid for it, and we have them all on microfilm and microfiche here. We have a scanner that we can pull them up on, and you're welcome to look at them. The originals are in Toronto. I don't believe they let people see the originals anymore at Toronto. There, you also have to look at microfilm and microfiche. But yeah, so those would be your two access points for the George MacDonald papers, the Hiram Walker historical papers.
So the finding aid, is that only at the Bobby House?
It is at
Okay.
this time. However, we have been working on typing it up and getting it into different formats. And you know, with the interest that's being shown, it might be something I inquire with the powers that be that we get up there and make it available on the internet.
So you have like computers in the Bobby House for researchers like to look up these finding aids?
Not at this time. It is good old paper.
Oh, okay.
It is
Okay.
it is a good old paper book. In some cases, um, you know, we if the research is very in depth, there have been times that I have pulled out a Word document for people to have an easier, quicker search, but those are basically just available for staff.
Okay. I think that was all. I was kept writing things down here.
Heather, can I ask, you were talking about the microfilms, the microfiche,
Oh,
and the scanners. Are visitors allowed to bring, a USB in that they could save images that they find themselves? And is there a fee to do that?
so there is the scanner is attached to a computer. That computer is my computer. So yes, we can put a USB and those images could be scanned onto the USB.
Okay.
At this time, it's like a $2 fee per scan.
Okay, great.
Um, a lot of people, we encourage them to take their cell phone and take a picture of it. The scanning is good for us if we're doing an exhibit, but in most cases, the photograph is just as usable.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
Okay, I remember this was many, many years ago. I can't even remember how many years ago, but you were able to actually give me a copy of a picture of one of the Bobbies, the
Mhm.
son of James, I think, married an Urquhart, which is
Yeah.
my husband's family. So
Mhm.
there are some really amazing things there. I just didn't know there was so much online that you have now as well. So
Yeah, so the database is a really, like, I would say our most popular and um our our best images are added to that database already. So that's a really good place to start if you're looking for a specific time period or even a specific early settler for the area. Certain family names will definitely jump out. And as I said, we're adding more to it constantly. We are also, some of the images we're getting into the more modern time period as well. Um, we're trying to beef up our, let's say, 1950s to 2000s collection as well, realizing that these are also going to be important parts of, you know, the museum's future in the next 50 years. People are going to want to see those pictures too.
for sure, for sure. So any other questions, Cindy?
Nope, I don't have any else coming in. And I just want to make a comment to what you just talked about. Are you saying that if we're over 50, we're old? That
Not
time
at
period is our
all.
time period.
Not at all. But we're recognizing that the early curators of our museum were very fixated on the 17 and
Mhm.
early 1800s, and we're very lacking in the very period that our curators were living in.
Yeah.
They didn't think to collect in 1958. They didn't think, we really don't have huge collections from the 1920s, and we now know how popular the 1920s are. We also recognized, uh, during the pandemic, we were very much collecting the pandemic history, knowing that, give it, 100 years, we had just done an exhibit on the Spanish flu and not had much to give for that. And so we wanted the people in 100 years to have so much information about the pandemic that they'll be cursing us for having too much.
So if people do have things, you said that you're not actively searching, but you do accept donations. So should they just, send an email in and explain what they have and to see if you're interested?
Yeah. So we have a mandate to collect for Windsor and Essex County, all time periods. Um, Things come into the museum's collection or offered to the museum's collection, and they go to our acquisitions committee, who meets twice a year. The committee then looks at, do we have this already represented in our collection? Is this in better condition than the one we already have in our collection? Does it tell a different story than what we already have? Or is this a completely new story that we haven't told before? And so then the committee will then decide yay or nay. Do we have room for it? Because that's another huge issue we have. And then we will add things into the collection. So sending an email with the story connected to the artifact you're offering and a picture of that artifact is very helpful to the committee to make those decisions. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, well, we're reaching our end of our time anyway. So if there are no more questions, I just want to thank Heather for your presentation. It was outstanding, and I know it gives family researchers like ourselves encouragement to dig deep into our ancestor stories by visiting Museum Windsor for sure, and the Francois Bobby House for sure.
Well, I look forward to seeing researchers.
Okay, that's great. Okay, then we'll close the meeting off now. I think you'll see repetition of this or a recording of this webinar will be on the YouTube channel in usually it's about a week's time, and so you can always look at it again because I'm sure you'll pick up more ideas about what you want to do. And we'll see you all at our next webinar in April. And by then it'll be nice and warm. Okay, good night to all then.
Thanks, Linda.
Okay.
Thanks, Heather.